welcome to the Liberty Show. I'm Manuel Carlos with Ron Senkush.
Hello, folks.
How's it going today, Ron?
Fantastic.
All right. So, anything new and exciting going on?
Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit today about Kent Hoeven and what happened to him, right?
Yeah, Kent Hoeven. If you look at some of the different libertarian or alternative news websites, Kent Hoeven has been in jail now for 100 months for structuring. Now, in previous Liberty shows, we've talked about structuring. You saw the Mike Maloney video. Basically what that is that the IRS has a form out there that they require companies to fill out called a suspicious activity report. And that is if you take $10,000 out in cash or deposit it, they have to fill out a form, turn it into the IRS. And this was sold to the American people that this was to combat money laundering for drugs or for terrorism. Well, people know that that's going to be turned in to the government for $10,000. So whether they're doing drugs, whether they're just using their money, it doesn't really matter. It's your money if you want to take it out and use it. People became aware of that, and what they start doing is when they would do cash transactions, they would make sure that it didn't hit the $10,000 limit. So they came out with something called structuring, and the IRS says, well, wait a minute, you need to fill out a report for this, because if they're taking out under $10,000, they're obviously hiding something. So we need to turn them in. Well, Kent Hoeven, he was a pastor, had his own congregation, and he's a strict interpretation of the Bible. But he also, I think what got him in trouble is not that, is he is very anti-Federal Reserve, and he's anti-big government, and he spoke out a lot about that, and he had a following. Now, most of us can speak out about the government and taxes and say how much we don't like them and how wrong they are, and they're not going to do anything to us because most of the time nobody's listening to us, or we may have the ear of one or two people. You start getting a following, they're going to come after you.
Now you become a threat.
You're a threat to the structure.
And so how do they do it? They target you with these bills that were written and sold to you as something they're going to use to get the bad guys, to get the drug dealers, to get the terrorists. When in reality, they're not really so concerned about that at all. They just need more weapons and more tools to take out their opposition. Exactly.
And I wanted to lead into this video because this is just going to be an update from a guy named Coach Dave. And he's starting a petition, and they're trying to raise some funds to free Kent Hoeven. And he makes the point a lot in the video that, hey, these laws that they're using against Kent Hoeven were intended for the drug dealers. And what we're saying here at the Liberty Show, I don't think those laws were really intended for the drug dealers. That's how they sold them to the American public.
Yeah, folks, this happens all the time. It happens in economic law. It happens when we try to say that we need access for the handicap at stores, and that needs to be a law. Look, big corporations are behind those ideas because they can afford those things, and your mom and pop store that they compete with down on the corner can't. And so they can use them to run them out of business. There's always these either unintended or intended circumstances of these legislation. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't tell you whether or not they're thinking these things up either before or after the laws are written. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that they're being used in that fashion, and this is why we need to think very carefully about what we want our government to do and what kind of power we're handing to them, because they say it's for one thing, and the next thing you know, now you're speaking up, and it's time for us to use it against you.
Exactly. Here's a video. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hi friends, this is Coach Dave Daubenmire at newswithviews.tv at newswithviews.com. Thanks for tuning in today. I just returned from Pensacola, Florida with a group of friends of mine, and we went down to stand with our friend Dr. Kent Hoeven, who's on trial in Pensacola, Florida, for the charge of mail fraud. I think it's important that I give you a little bit of information that's certainly been misreported in the press. And anytime you do a Google search or anything like that on Dr. Hoeven, the wrong information comes up. Let me make this very clear. Dr. Kent Hoeven has served 100 months in jail, not for tax issues, You'll do a Google search and they'll say that he's a tax protester or a tax evasion or whatever. Dr. Kent Hoeven has spent 100 months in jail, 8.5 years, for the issue of structuring. And just recently, the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, John Koskinen, just came out and issued an apology to Americans all across the spectrum for having misused the idea of structuring in seizing bank accounts. If my recollection is correct, it was like 127 people across America last year who had their bank accounts seized because of charges of structuring. So it would be important for us to understand what structuring is. It was a policy that was put in place to help law enforcement deal with drug dealers who were trying to launder money. And the law said that anytime a cash deposit of $10,000 or a cash withdrawal of $10,000 was made, it had to be reported to the IRS. Well, people began to get around that by taking out less than $10,000, maybe $9,500, which is what Dr. Kent Hoeven did. Now, there's nothing illegal about doing that. It is his own money. He would go to the bank and he would take out the money, $9,500 a week, maybe, and pay the people that he owed money to, pay the expenses of their ministry, of the people who worked for him, instead of having to do 1099s or whatever was involved with that. Well, the IRS put together this policy based on structuring, put in place specifically for drug dealers, and that is what they charged Kent Hoeven with, was structuring, not tax evasion. He never evaded any taxes at all. And then to top it off, folks, after Kent Hoeven, over a period of several years, took $9,000 a week out of his bank account to pay his bills, he didn't stuff it in a pillow or under a mattress. It was his money that the ministry had earned. After Kent Hoeven had amassed about $434,000 in withdrawals over the period of time paying his bills, the IRS said, listen, because that money was involved in structuring, that money belongs to us. And they tried to seize $434,000 from Dr. Hoeven. And of course, he didn't have $434,000 because why? They'd spent it. They'd paid it. They weren't trying to hide anything from anybody. So Dr. Hoeven, when he was put in jail, then they went about the idea of trying to seize the property to come up with the $434,000. And what Dr. Hoeven is on trial today, folks, he is not a tax protester or a tax evader. What Dr. Hoeven is on trial today for, and I consider it piling on, is what they called mail fraud from jail. Now, what he did was a perfectly legal action, filing court actions from jail. He's done that for the 8 years he's been in there, trying to get himself free. He filed a motion whereby he put into the file of his properties a legal document saying, listen, this property is still being contested. This is not a free and clear property. And so when they would do a title search, someone wanted to buy his property, they'd do a title search. This letter would be in there saying, listen, there's some debate as to who owns this property. Buyer beware. You're buying some property that's still in dispute. Perfectly legal that he did it. But because the judge had told him to stop doing that, stop filing the reports, to stop filing the appeals, they found him in contempt of court. So Kent Hoeven is in jail, or is in court today for two things: mail fraud. Listen, folks, if he had taken that filing and he had hand carried it to the courthouse, it would not be mail fraud. Do you understand that? It would not be mail fraud. But he couldn't hand carry it. It had to go through the mail. And issue number two, he has the right to appeal while he's in there. But they're also charging him with contempt of court because he continued to exercise his God-given right, his American right to appeal. The First Amendment says the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's what Kent Hoeven has done. Folks, he is not a tax protester. He has not refused to pay his taxes. They have seized $434,000 from him already, which was not their money to begin with. And now they want to put Kent Hoeven in jail for an additional 20 years. It's amazing. We had the opportunity to be in the courtroom, spent 3 days down there in support of Dr. Kent Hoeven, and just want you to know that I believe that the charges that they're bringing against him right now are nothing more than piling on, trying to put him in jail for an additional 20 years. I would request that you'd pray for Dr. Dino, pray for Kent Hoeven, that justice would be served. So more than anything with this video, I want to clear something up. He is not a tax protester. He's not in jail for tax evasion. He's not in jail for not properly paying his taxes. He's in jail for a process called structuring, which was designed to be used to combat drug dealers. Is that unbelievable? Pray for Kent Hoeven that justice would be done in his case. This is Coach Dave Daubenmire at newswithviews.tv, at newswithviews.com. We'll see you next time.
Second plank in Karl Marx's manifesto was a heavy progressive income tax. Don't get me started on that one. We have a long 30-page letter we can send you on that one. Send our office a few bucks to cover copies, and we'll send you our 30-page letter about this topic right here. Okay? The third one was abolish the rights of inheritance. He's against it. Bible says. Number 4, confiscate property rights. Number 5, a central bank. Remember, love of money, root of all evil. 1913, we got a creature from Jekyll Island, Georgia, called the Federal Reserve. You ought to read that book and find the history behind the Federal Reserve. Nothing federal about it, and there are no reserves. It's no more federal than the Federal Express or Federal rifle shells. Okay. What happened? We traded our real money, which is silver and gold, for worthless paper. Real soon, those who control the real money will require all transactions to be controlled electronically by an embedded chip. I have in my wallet a $5 Federal Reserve note from 1928. Very interesting reading. Look what it says here. Redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury, or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank. What are they telling me? I can trade this in for gold, or I can trade it in for lawful money. Isn't that what it says? You mean this is not lawful money? No, this is a Federal Reserve note. This is a debt note. This is not money. We've got a whole generation now who grows up thinking this is money, and it is not money, folks. It is a note. It's a debt note. That would be a long, interesting study. Also, you may want to get into. Then in 1933, a couple of years after this was issued, President Roosevelt declared to Congress of Governors that a national state of emergency existed. The Great Depression was going on. So the governors voted unanimously to give the president emergency power to wage war on the economy. These powers would not be available under normal constitutional process. March 1933, Congress voted to give the President of the United States and to the Secretary of the Treasury the emergency powers sanctioned to wage war through executive orders. Abraham Lincoln issued the first executive order to bring troops into the South. That war was not about slavery. That war was about states' rights. That's another long, interesting story. But in 1933, Section 5B of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 was amended to include the citizens of the United States. By the way, capital U, capital S, you don't want to be a citizen of that one. You want to be a citizen of the small u, capital S. That's another long, interesting story. Okay? By and through their ability to own gold and silver as an enemy of the United States. In 1933, they said if you own gold, you're an enemy of the country. Everybody turned their gold in to the government. 1933. Then in 1934, this note was issued, which I have in my collection at home. It says right here, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury or at any Federal Reserve Bank. That's still not lawful money, folks. It's fraudulent. See, the note is evidence of debt, not money. The Coinage Act of 1792, which has never been revoked, defines a dollar as 25.8 grains of gold or 412 grains of silver. That's why a silver dollar was always the same size. It had to be 90% silver and had to weigh a certain amount. And it was a real lawful dollar. Here's the new euro. Long story there. Basically, they took away our gold and gave us paper. Federal Reserve notes. Next, they're going to take away the paper and give us plastic, where you have to have a record of the transaction. There's no record of a paper transaction. Now with computers, there can be a record of every transaction that's made. Finally, they're going to take away the plastic and put a mark in the hand or forehead. Coming soon. In Pensacola, a couple years ago, they had a festival. Cash was not allowed. You could not spend money, or Federal Reserve notes. You had to have a card. Interesting. I'm telling the truth. Okay. Number 7, government ownership of factories and agriculture. Number 8, government control of labor. Number 9, corporate farms and regional planning. Number 10, free education. Did you know the free public school idea was Karl Marx's plan? Hitler said, you let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state. Now the publics, I love my country, but I fear my government. And you better too. Here are the communist rules for revolution. Rule number 1, corrupt the young, get them away from religion. Rule number 2, break down the moral virtues. Rule number 3, encourage a soft government attitude toward crime. Number 4, divide the people into hostile groups. Number 5, get the people's minds off their government. Focus their attention on athletics or sex. Did you know in 18... Rule number 6, get control of all the media, like CNN, the Communist News Network. Number 8, cause the registration of all firearms so that you can eventually confiscate them. Lenin said, one person with a gun can control 100 people without one. Now picture this. You're standing there in the bank to cash a check. Somebody walks in and holds up a gun and says, everybody lay on the floor. Everybody lays on the floor. Now picture this. Every red-blooded, honest, God-fearing American citizen is packing a gun. He's not looking for trouble. He just has a gun, just in case, you know. The guy walks into the bank, pulls out a gun. Everybody lay on the floor. Instantly, 80 guns are pointed at him. No, sir. You lay on the floor. Gun control is not about guns, it's about control. Every dictator has wanted gun control. Lenin wanted it, Stalin wanted it, Hitler wanted it. See, the one who has the gun is in control, and this goes back to the ye shall be as gods. You know, you are the boss. Goes right back to that, folks, okay? Our founding fathers gave us the Second Amendment, which says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They gave us a Second Amendment so we could protect ourselves in case the government went bad. That's what it's for. See, the bad guys are not afraid of a few hundred people with guns. But if everybody's armed, it's going to be hard to take over a country. If they know everybody's armed. Hitler said, at least this is one quote I've not been able to prove, but I've had several folks tell me it's true, but I can't find it yet. He said, this year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation had full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future. Janet Reno said gun registration is not enough. Waiting periods are only a step. Registration is only a step. The prohibition of private firearms is the goal. Ohio Senator Metzenbaum said, what good does it do to ban some guns? All guns should be banned. Sarah Brady of the Brady Bill said, our task of creating a socialist America can only succeed when those who would resist have been totally disarmed. Bill Clinton said, and we should. Every community in the country could then start doing major weapons sweeps and then destroying the weapons, not selling them. And I misspelled his name on purpose to give it the Soviet flavor, okay? But you know, in the first 12 months after gun owners in Australia were forced to surrender 640,000 guns to the government, they destroyed them. The program cost the government $500 million. Well, after that happened, in the first 12 months, homicides nationwide were up 3.2%. Assaults went up 8.6%. Armed robberies went up 44%. In the state of Victoria, homicides with firearms are up 300%. Figures over the previous 25 years show a steady decrease in armed robbery with firearms. There's also been a dramatic increase in break-ins and assaults of the elderly. In 1911, Turkey established gun control. Later, 1.5 million Armenians, unable to defend themselves, were slaughtered. In 1929, the Soviet Union established gun control. And for the next 30 years, 20 million dissidents, unable to defend themselves, were rounded up and slaughtered. 1938, Nazi gun control said Jews are prohibited from carrying firearms and ammunition. They established gun control in 1938, and for the next 6 years, at least 13 million Jews and others were rounded up and exterminated because they were unable to defend themselves. Okay? China established gun control in 1935, and for the next 10 years, 20 million political dissidents unable to defend themselves were exterminated. Guatemala established gun control in 1964. In the next 15 years, 100,000 Mayan Indians unable to defend themselves were exterminated, killed, murdered. Uganda established gun control in 1970. For the next 8 years, 300,000 Christians were murdered because they were unable to defend themselves. Cambodia established gun control in 1956, and from 75 to 77, 1 million educated people, maybe more, unable to defend themselves, were rounded up and exterminated. Defenseless people around the country, around the world, exterminated in the 20th century, about 56 million. Next time someone talks in favor of gun control, ask them, who do you want to round up and exterminate? See, with guns we are citizens, without guns we are subjects. Well said, Mr. Bracken.
Okay, hey, we're back. You know, when the video was running, Ron and I were just talking about some things. Peter Schiff's dad, Erwin Schiff, he's in a high security prison right now because he spoke out against the IRS. He wrote a book and he said the IRS and the income tax system is illegitimate. And he started gaining a following. People were listening to him, and what happened to him?
Yeah, so essentially, I believe he was charged with some sort of aiding and abetting type of offense where they said, you're telling people not to file tax returns, and that's a crime. So we're going to throw you in jail for telling people that they don't have to file tax returns because that's wrong. So sort of a false testament or falsifying information or whatever you want to call it, some kind of trumped up charge like that. And so, and then they wanted to scare the people who weren't filing the returns into saying, oh, they needed an example. They needed a patsy. They need to say, okay, so if you're going to go down this route, this is what we're going to do. And I mean, folks, we could do 2 or 3 shows about this where we could talk about it nonstop. If you're curious, if you're piqued on this, you need to do your own research because you will not believe the stuff you're going to find, especially when the guy talks about how the court was actually handled when he went to file things, when he went to try to testify. I mean, the guy was like silenced. You know, his attorneys couldn't even speak. They just ramrodded this whole case through and sent this guy to prison without almost any due process whatsoever. And if we tried to highlight it here, or whatever, it'd sound like we were making it up. So go do your own research on it and find it out for yourself.
And even though we disagree with all this, we're not telling you not to pay taxes because we know if we tell you that, they're going to come after us with guns.
Right. Let's be clear on that.
Let's be clear. So we're libertarians. We're not stupid. All right. Now we've got a video from the Libertarian Party that was produced about the Fourth Amendment, about how the Libertarian Party is the only political party that really stands for the Fourth Amendment, that will talk about it, and they mean what they say.
Yeah. Illegal search and seizure is the key to the Fourth Amendment, and if you don't have the right to be secure in your possessions, then you have no right to own property. All property rights are null and void, and without property rights, almost no other right matters.
Exactly, and this ties into the structuring because what the IRS is having companies is spy on people.
That's right.
And so they're getting around that Fourth Amendment by saying, okay, we're going to make a regulation that you need to spy on people for us. And then you need to turn it in and say, hey, I think they're doing something wrong. So why don't you watch this video about the Fourth Amendment from the Libertarian Party, and we'll be back.
Thanks to the brave and patriotic actions of whistleblower Edward Snowden, Americans now know that their Fourth Amendment rights have been blown out of the water. The government has been routinely spying on millions of Americans. Your telephone calls, emails, text messages, chat sessions, Skype sessions are no longer private. The National Security Agency, the NSA, has put virtually every American under surveillance. You're being watched, listened to, and tracked just about everywhere. And it's not just the NSA that is invading your privacy. Cameras mounted on toll booths and in cities across America enable government officials to know where you are and where you've been. Authorities can break into your home with a no-knock, sneak and peek court order from a secret judge. The IRS and other government regulators can access your bank records without your knowledge or consent. And the government has authorized thousands of agents to look at your personal medical records. If Obamacare ever goes into effect, it will get even worse. There aren't too many places in America today where you can act or speak in complete privacy. But luckily, there's one place in America where you're not being watched, where you're free to do as you please without Big Brother eavesdropping on you, where you can't be punished for your actions. Where is this? The voting booth. The place where you can choose the president, U.S. senators, congressmen and women, and state and local officials. Voting booth where you can toss out every politician who voted for the Patriot Act, NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, or FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The voting booth, where you have the power to shut down the NSA and end government surveillance of innocent Americans. The unpatriotic and treasonous government spying going on today is not the function of a few officials abusing their power. The problem is not the abuse of power. The problem is the power to abuse. Take away the power and no abuse is possible. As long as the Patriot Act, NDAA, and FISA remain on the books, as long as there are secret courts, and as long as the federal government spends $75 billion every year on 17 separate spy agencies, do you really believe they're going to stop spying on Americans? If all we do is make a few minor reforms, how many more years will it take before another brave whistleblower steps forward to reveal that surveillance programs remain in full force? Passing a law that violates your Fourth Amendment rights is in and of itself an abuse. There are no abuses of the NDAA. The NDAA is an abuse. There are no abuses of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is an abuse. Voting for the Patriot Act or NDAA is an abuse. Leaving them on the books is an abuse. Every politician who voted for the Patriot Act, NDAA, CISPA, or FISA violated your Fourth Amendment rights, violated his or her oath of office to uphold the Constitution, and created the inevitable consequence of the massive surveillance programs we're seeing today. How do we remove these laws and agencies? By refusing to vote for any politician who voted for them, or who in any way signals that they would keep them on the books, and by voting for the candidates who expressly promise to repeal them. When you vote for a candidate who votes for these laws, you're sanctioning, condoning, and empowering the government to spy on innocent Americans. You're giving politicians license to abuse. Almost every Democrat and Republican in the U.S. House or Senate today has voted for FISA, the Patriot Act, or the NDAA. Despite tough talk of reforming laws or investigating abuses, they vote to keep abusive laws in place. They are the masters of abuse of the Fourth Amendment. Every vote they get drives one more nail into the coffin of your right to privacy and justice under the law. Since the Libertarian Party was formed 42 years ago, it has been the only political party in America that has called for immediate, unconditional repeal of the laws that violate your Fourth Amendment rights. Libertarian candidates and the Libertarian platform have called for ending all electronic surveillance, ending all warrantless searches, and